My digestive acid is leaking into my thoracic cavity. And the human is whistling. That was Char speaking. A tall, iridescent-skinned Varnic student currently flattened against the mossy bark of a tree that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. His gill sacs fluttered anxiously, sending out a sharp scent, the Varnic version of existential dread. No one ever said the survival exam was meant to be easy. For generations, the Pan-Galactic Concord had enforced this brutal rite of passage for all elite academy graduates, the full planetary survival assessment. Random world. Real dangers. No help. No do-overs. This year, the location was a true wild card, an unnamed Class M jungle planet, complete with unpredictable gravity pockets and a fauna index that needed its own hazard label. But what really had the cohort buzzing was this year's special ingredient: a human. Jace Mull Rooney should never have been in the advanced xenobiology group. He'd failed astrocalculus twice. He'd dumped a bowl of nutrient paste on the dean's hover slippers. He once tried to cook chloric fungus with a literal flamethrower. Thanks to a bureaucratic slip-up, something about Code 17B and a misfiled organ donor card, he got thrown into the mix. And now, as the alien sunset bled gold through the canopy and bioluminescent spores floated in the air, Jace was dragging bundles of vines across a clearing, humming a tone-deaf version of Take Me Home. Country roads. I believe he's nesting, whispered Zath. A four-eyed florist with silvery scales and a stammer that flared up whenever he was nervous. His throat sacs puffed up in and out. No. He's not panicking like the rest of us, muttered Gree, a broad-shouldered, four-legged Cernak. His species revered order and spreadsheets. And right now, nothing about this made sense. He has no venom sensors, no subdermal armor, no echolocation. And what's he doing? Building with sticks. Jace, meanwhile, had lashed 5 sturdy branches together with some kind of sinewy vine. Above his head, he was weaving flexible shoots into what looked suspiciously like a platform. He paused, spat a seed to the side, and grinned. Good foundation. Now for a rain flap. Can't trust those clouds. Smell like onions. Nobody knew where he'd gotten the pouch of seeds. Everyone was dropped with the same standard issue survival kit, no weapons, no gadgets. Just a multi-species nutrient bar with the texture of old space glue. But somehow, Jace had extra odds and ends stashed in his jacket. He didn't even flinch at the 6-foot insects, the screaming night predators, or the tang of acid moss that made everyone with more than 2 nasal glands choke. He's immune, Zath hissed. He touched that pink mushroom. It sprayed spores. And all he did was sneeze and keep hammering. Not quite. Jace had paused, sniffed the air, and mused. Smells like horseradish. He'd even tasted the mushroom, then shrugged and kept building. Gree consulted the exam rules via his retinal uplink. We're supposed to last 6 planetary cycles. No aid. No outside interference. No tech. No shortcuts. And the humans building a treehouse. He muttered. He's adapting, Gree said, almost sullenly. Up in the branches, a bird-like thing with 4 beaks and a transparent ribcage let out a mating call that sounded like a car crash crossed with a dentist's drill. Everyone flinched, except Jace, who glanced up and nodded as if he'd just heard thunder. Might rain. Gotta get the roof up. Char grumbled. He's just making things up. We don't even have an atmospheric readout. Haven't mapped a water source. He's just guessing. Jace stood, stretched, and cracked his back with a pop. Not guessing. The bugs are flying lower. Winds shifted. Plus, I licked a rock this morning, it tasted wetter than yesterday. Zath made a noise somewhere between a wheeze and a whimper, possibly respect, possibly horror. You can taste humidity? Jace shrugged. Can't you? The others spent their days overanalyzing terrain, running calculations, and launching failed attempts at organization. 2 tried digging burrows. 1 attempted a photosynthetic trance and was now covered in biting larvae. All of them were miserable. sleep-deprived, and increasingly afraid. Their years of study meant nothing here. They came from worlds where kitchens were run by thought-controlled gel matrices and no one ever touched actual dirt. Jace was barefoot, dirt-caked, and had a massive leaf tied around his forehead as a sweatband. His treehouse had a sturdy base, a partial wall, and what was unmistakably a cup holder crafted from a split nut pod. "He even makes furniture," Gree muttered. Night fell. Glowing eyes blinked open in the jungle. The noises changed, less rustling, more whispery clicks. The air got colder. One student activated a heat gland and instantly attracted a carnivorous vine. Another tried to hang upside down to simulate a low-frequency repulsion field, only to tumble down, dislocating a thoracic limb. Jace, meanwhile, climbed into his half-built shelter, tossed a handful of insect bits over his shoulder, and called down. "Found these under a log. Pretty spicy. Anyone want some?" No one moved. Jace shrugged. "Suit yourselves." Then he reached into a mysterious sack, no one knew where he got it, and pulled out a tiny, twinkling gadget. A solar-charged camplight. Totally forbidden. Somehow, it felt more comforting than criminal. He clicked it on, hung it up, leaned back on a mossy pillow, and let out a satisfied sigh. Below, the 6 aliens huddled together, wet and hungry, realizing with mounting dread that their biggest threat wasn't the predators, it was the guy building a summer cabin before nightfall. When the sun rose, Jace had a porch. Not a metaphor, a real porch. Complete with an overhang and a seating nook made from bent branches. He'd even lined the rail with sharpened sticks, their tips blackened from a fire none of them saw him make. Gentle smoke curled from his fire pit under a rock slab. Something sizzled, smelling far better than the nutrient bars. Gree blinked from behind a fern that oozed a numbing mist. "He's domesticated the wilderness. He's grilling." Char's mandibles clicked. "That is not a verb we were trained to prepare for." From his throne of comfort, Jace waved to the shivering, mud-caked group. "Morning. Fire's open if you want to toast those jelly beans from last night. Might be eggs. I don't speak bird." Zath crept forward, cradling a translucent pod that pulsed with warmth. "You cooked yours?" Jace squinted. "You didn't?" Zath looked at his pod. "I nested it under my armpit for warmth." "Ah. Classic." Jace nodded. By the end of day 2, the group was unraveling. One student spiraled into a logic loop trying to classify every predator by its call. Another meditated on a slippery boulder and was attacked by a slug the size of a small cart. No one had slept more than a few hours, except Jace, who'd made a curtain from leaf panels for privacy, built a drying rack for his clothes, and brewed tea from piney needles and hot river water. Char, legs shaking, finally approached the treehouse. "What exactly is your plan?" he asked. Jace looked up from whittling a makeshift spork. "Plan? Live through the week. Stay fed. Don't die." "That is not a plan." Gree grunted. "That's a passive declaration." "Worked for raccoons." Jace grinned. Char rubbed his cranial crest. "Confused. You speak in riddles." Jace shrugged. "Confusion or wisdom, just depends on your angle." The others watched, fascinated, as he used a homemade hook to pull a chunk of roasted something off the fire and tossed a piece down to a small predator waiting below. "You're feeding them now?" Gree hissed. "Negotiating?" Jace wiped his mouth. "Ever try fighting a 10-legged nightmare lizard with no weapon and wet socks? Snacks are safer." "I'm starting to think he's unstable," Zath whispered. "Unstable beings don't build tree houses," Char countered. And yet, here we are. By late afternoon, the sky darkened, thick with electrical charge. The aliens huddled under a damp, sulfur-scented overhang. Jace had already thatched his roof, dug a drainage trench, and angled his fire pit so the rain wouldn't drown the flames. When the downpour hit, his shelter stayed dry. He leaned back, humming to himself as the wind roared, off-key. But undaunted, when the storm cleared, Gree approached. Wet and frustrated. Human. Explain your behavior. Jace looked up. Which part? All of it. Jace scratched his jaw. I grew up where tornadoes hit twice a year. So we learned to make do. Grandma always said, if you got a knife, a lighter, and a sense of direction, you'll outlive the guy with a plasma rifle and an instruction manual. Never had a plasma rifle. But the rest is covered. Gree stared. This isn't your home world. Nope. But you act like it is. Trees are trees. Weather's weather. You adapt or you rot. Zath's curiosity got the better of him. Did you study primitive tactics? Jace shook his head. Camping guides. I had this old book, Wilderness Survival for Midwestern Idiots. Changed my life. Char looked disgusted. He's improvising his way through death. This is offensive. Jace shrugged. Grabbing his digging stick. Well, you can keep being offended. I'm going to look for more of those root things. Mash up like earthy potatoes. Without waiting for a response, he vanished into the undergrowth. Humming. The aliens watched. Silently unnerved. He shouldn't be thriving, Zath said softly. No, Gree agreed. But he is. He doesn't even know how much danger he's in. Char added bitterly. Gree watched the smoldering fire. The handmade tools. The treehouse porch. Or maybe he does. And just doesn't care. On the fourth morning, Zath finally snapped. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even in his species' instincts. Florins were bred for composure. Conditioned to analyze before reacting. And genetically programmed to never, ever cause a scene. But there was something about the human's relentless home improvement streak. The final straw being a second story with an actual bamboo shoot for waste. That cracked Zath open like a dry seed pod. He stormed into the clearing. All 6 limbs flailing. Voice trembling. You're mocking us. This whole display. You're just trying to make us look incompetent. Jace, lying on a woven mat, chewing what looked like leathery root bark and brushing his teeth with a twig, looked up in genuine surprise. Mocking you? I'm just trying not to die. Man, you built a toilet slide. Zath screeched. And you have a breakfast nuke. Jace just grinned. Unbothered. Needed a spot for coffee. There is no coffee. Zath nearly wailed. Jace reached into a bundle near his fire pit. Roasted bark shavings. Crushed seeds. Not coffee. But close enough. Zath dropped onto a rock. Vent sacs fluttering. We have suffered digestive failure, neural disorientation, and constant exposure to predatory pheromones. And you are decorating. Jace looked around, waving his hand at the open air. Technically exterior decorating. No walls yet. Gree and Char appeared. Drawn by the commotion, they stopped in their tracks, staring up at the new modifications. Jace had strung a lantern made from a hollow gourd and glowing bug slime. There was a swing, gently swaying beneath the platform. He's lost his mind. Gree muttered. And his taste. Or maybe we have. Char replied, voice dry as bone. But no matter what they told themselves, the truth kept creeping in. Jace wasn't just surviving, he was, impossibly, thriving. Amid carnivorous vines, acid-soaked moss, and the soundtrack of creatures that screamed like rusted metal, the human had built not luxury, but absurd, cobbled-together comfort. Gree squinted at the various knots and lashings. Where are you getting the rope? Jace's eyes sparkled. Split some bark fibers. Twisted them up. Double-braided the thicker ones. You know rope braiding? Char asked. Incredulous. Jace shrugged. Boy Scouts. 3rd place in the regional knot contest. They stared, unsure if he was serious. He chewed quietly, at ease, as if he'd just pitched a tent in his own backyard. Then the smoke appeared, not from Jace's fire, but a thick, oily column rising above the eastern ridge. Steady. Unnatural. Far too black for wood. Gree straightened up instantly. Eyes narrowing. Synthetic burn. That's not native. not a wildfire. Could be part of the exam. Char offered. Environmental escalation. Or another test group. Zath suggested. Or something worse, Jace said, shading his eyes. We should form a perimeter. Char barked. Wait it out. Jace shook his head. I'm not great at waiting. Besides, what if it's a crashed probe with supplies? Or a weather drone? He slung a satchel, hand-stitched from leaves and thorn hooks, over his shoulder and started walking. The aliens hesitated. Following the human felt wrong. He never planned, never discussed, just acted. But he also hadn't been poisoned, mauled, or reduced to hallucinating from parasite gas, like Char 2 nights before. In the end, they followed. The hike was miserable. Thorny vines snagged at their limbs. The air grew thick with spores and heat. At one point, a cluster of camouflaged vinefish dropped onto Zath's back, trying to burrow into his shoulder sack. Jace knocked them away with a stick, muttering, "Weirdest jungle piñatas ever." After nearly an hour, they found the source, a sleek, angular module half buried in the muck. Not local. Burn marks still fresh. The hatch hung open. Jace crouched low, stick ready. He peered inside, then waved the others over. Looks like an old survey pod. Ration packs. A cracked solar battery. Dead transmitter. Gree crept closer, inspecting the hull. No struggle. No body. Probably abandoned. Jace opened a ration pack, sniffed it, then bit in. Tastes like chalk and beans. Could be worse. Char ran a finger along the pod wall. There's a marking, not academy issue. Jace leaned in, squinting at the scratched metal. Graffiti. Or, claw marks. Someone else was here. Previous candidates? Zath asked nervously. Or something that eats candidates. Jace replied. They fell silent. After a moment, Jace started scavenging anything usable, scrap metal. A partially intact fuel cell. A broken antenna. You're scavenging? Gree asked. Surprised. Yep. Pod's evidence. But it's also a toolbox. Jace replied easily. By dusk, they'd returned to the clearing. Jace wasted no time. The metal scraps became ladder reinforcements. The antenna. A signal rod tied with vines. The fuel cell. Cracked open and wired into rock capacitors. Powered his gourd lamp brighter than before. Zath gnawed on a nutrient bar, staring at his own leaking, sagging shelter. Around him, the rest of the cohort sat huddled in mud and disappointment. Then he glanced up at Jace's platform, now painted with neat clay marks, just because. Apparently, it looked nice. He whispered, barely audible, we are not ready for his planet. On the 6th day, the jungle itself fell eerily silent. Gone were the shrieks and clicks, the constant whine of sapflies. Not even the wind stirred. It felt as if the entire forest held its breath. Char broke the silence. This is the final escalation. The Concorde always builds to a climax event. Zath nodded, voice tight. The test requires an ultimate scenario. Predator. Environmental collapse, maybe both. Gree fished out the one item none of them had dared use, a beacon flare. Marked for emergencies. If we trigger this, the exam ends. But we fail. No one ever has. Char muttered. It's a shame beacon. Just then, Jace emerged from his treehouse, face smeared with streaks of clay, carrying a spear fashioned from a sharpened pole and metal shard. Something's coming. The group turned to him, tension rising. You feel it too? Gree asked. Jace nodded. The forest is holding its breath. Then, from the ridge, a sound cut through the hush. Not loud, just wrong. Like wood being chewed apart. Slowly. By something with too many teeth. Branches cracked. The trees themselves seemed to recoil. Char stumbled back. That's no simulation. Never is. At the end, Jace muttered. They barely had time to form up, a loose semicircle with makeshift weapons, before it appeared. At first, it looked like a feline. Then a crustacean. Then a fungus. It moved like flowing tar. taller than Jace. Dripping vapor that made the air shimmer and twist. Its front limbs split open like jaws. Eyes blinked in every direction. Wherever it stepped, moss withered. Zath shrieked. "It's not in the database." "Of course it's not," Jace said calmly. "It's the final exam. Made to be unbeatable." "Then we fall with honor." Shah growled. "Nope." Jace replied. And took off running, straight at the thing. The others gasped. But Jace wasn't reckless. He veered sideways, flailing his arms, and hurled a burning gourd at its eyes. Sap flame splashed across the creature's face cluster. It roared, a sound so unnatural it seemed to turn the air inside out, and lashed out. Jace rolled, and drove his spear into a joint near its midsection. It cracked, purple liquid oozing. As it howled again from the trees, another figure dropped, a smaller, faintly glowing alien student. "You're late," Jace panted. The newcomer nodded, tossing him a jagged disc, an energy cutter. Jace caught it, spun, and slashed at the beast's limb. The monster thrashed, shrieking. "Now!" Jace shouted. "Flank it!" The others finally moved. Zath ducked in low, stabbing a jagged bone tool into the underbelly. Shah fired echo pulses to distract it. Gree launched a volley of rocks at its main eye cluster. Together, they pressed the beast back. It didn't die, but after a final shudder, it collapsed inward like a deflating suit, leaving only a blinking metallic orb behind. Jace stepped forward, picked it up, and grinned. "Proctor drone, test complete." Gree stared. That was an artificial proctor." Jace nodded. "Meant to test your guts. Or scare 'em out of you." Zath slumped to the ground. "I nearly lost all biological function." A low hum filled the clearing. Above, a circular disk, a shuttle, descended, lighting the jungle in beams of blue. The familiar Academy AI voice rang out, "Exam complete. All candidates accounted for. Prepare for extraction." The others stumbled to the landing site, battered and muddy, stunned but alive. Jace lingered, glancing at his treehouse one last time. Shah noticed. "You regret leaving?" Jace shrugged, a little smile tugging at his mouth. "Nah. Just proud. Honestly. Didn't think I'd last past day 2. Gree shook his head. "You are statistically anomalous." Zath snorted. "He did everything wrong. And it worked." The shuttle ramp dropped. Candidate Molo. "Debriefing on deck 3. The PA called." Jace grinned wider. "Guess they want the recipe for grilled root sticks." As the group boarded, every alien glanced at Jace, scratched, exhausted, dirty, but walking tall. He was the only one who hadn't just survived the jungle. He turned it into his home. Back at the academy, news of what happened spread like an asteroid collision. Every survival exam was recorded. By the end of the week, footage of Jace's jungle resort circulated among instructors, students, and just about anyone who'd ever worried about passing the planetary assessment. Thousands of species watched, some with disbelief, others with admiration. As a human, armed with nothing but a sack of random junk and a stubborn knack for tinkering, turned a death trap into something that looked suspiciously like a summer retreat. In the official debrief, Jace sat in a chair still dusted with clay and bark shavings, facing a semicircle of higher-ranking Concord instructors and analysts. Some eyed him with fascination, others with barely disguised skepticism. "Candidate Mull Rooney," one instructor began, tentacles drumming on the table. "Your survival tactics were unconventional. Can you summarize your approach for the record?" Jace leaned forward, looking more at ease here than he ever did in a classroom. "I didn't pass because I was the smartest. I passed because I didn't try to beat the forest. I let it live. And it let me live." A few heads cocked in confusion. Someone scribbled a note. Jace added with a faint grin. "Also, learn to tie knots. It saves lives." Word spread fast. Within a month, Jace's highlights played at every orientation hall. A warning and an inspiration. It didn't matter what galaxy you came from, no one had ever passed the survival exam quite like that. Months later, back on campus, a fresh batch of wide-eyed students gathered in the prep hall for their own survival test briefing. The whole screen flickered through highlights of years past, a Blorian glider sprinting across sand dunes to outpace a sand beast, a Trexil candidate building an ice dome to survive a hail surge, and, finally, a grainy clip of Jace in his treehouse, sipping bark coffee, legs swinging off a hand-built porch. A dozen students leaned in. "Who's that?" one whispered. "Mull Rooney," replied the instructor, with a half-smile. "Human." Another student squinted, skeptical. "What species relies on porch building?" The instructor let the question hang in the air, smile growing just a bit wider. "You'll see." And so, the story of the human who built a home at the edge of danger, who survived by turning the test itself into a little patch of civilization, lived on, not as a manual to follow, but as proof that sometimes the best way through the wild is simply to meet it as you are. A little messy, a little stubborn, and, when all else fails, ready to make the best out of a handful of roots and a roll of vine. Because, as every new candidate would soon learn, there are survival tactics. And then, there's the human way.